The envelope was folded under my door like a small, polite trespass. I saw the cream paper first, and then the names, Evan and Grace, one breath too familiar and not familiar at all. My hand paused on the knob. The coffee on the table had a ring around the saucer, steam thinning into the room like a sigh. I didn't want to open it. The sound of the paper was louder than it should have been, like a voice I used to know but couldn't place. My fingers finally broke the seal. The card inside was simple, the kind you buy when you don't need to shout. It smelled faintly of someone else's laundry.
For a moment, I only looked at the names, over and over, like a trick of the eyes. I remember the engagement dinner, how polite everyone was, how Evan laughed at the right moments. He used to lean across the table and tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, as if remembering to be kind. Grace sat at the far end and watched him the way someone watches a thing that will not be theirs. I kept saying to myself, maybe this is a mistake. Maybe a copy was mailed by accident. Maybe. The cup at my elbow cooled until it was only a saucer of memory. I set the invitation over it, as if placing it on a map. In the kitchen light, the names looked different, like signatures on a contract I hadn't read. My mouth tasted of metal, that sharpness fear borrows when it thinks it's surprise. I called my sister first, because who else would I call? The number rang 3 times and went to her voicemail. Her voice was the same polite hum it always had when she left messages. Small, bright, careful. I left one, my words awkward in her silence. Hey, it's me. Just checking, are you... everything okay? I said it softer than I felt. I told myself she would call back. She didn't. People always say they feel something in their chest when they learn a truth. Mine felt like a book sliding from a high shelf and opening on the floor. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet and steady, and all the pages showing. I kept turning the invitation over, looking for fingerprints or a smudge or a note. There was nothing. Just print and a little flourish at the end of Evan's name, like a signature pretending to be art. I remembered the way Evan used to say, "She's like family," as if rehearsing permission. I remembered Grace smiling that small, private smile when he said it. I thought of the summer when they sat on the porch swing and watched the dusk like they were making an agreement with the dark. Back then, it seemed like ordinary warmth. Now the memory clicked and looked stranger, like a painting with a new corner turned up. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary. The house settled around me, the fridge humming, a neighbour's car passing, the quick, ordinary sound of a life unaware. My hands went to the counter, and I found myself pressing the invitation flat, as if to smooth out time. I kept thinking of the little things that mean more later. His hand on my shoulder at the grocery store, the way he always chose the lemon tea I liked though he drank black. Small acts that used to feel like kindness. Small acts that hide other things. My phone buzzed once. A text from a number I didn't save. A photo of the 2 of them from last month. Grace's head on his shoulder, the light in her hair like forgiveness. No caption. No explanation. My thumb hovered over the screen. My first impulse was to delete it. My second was to scroll the thumbnails of nights I didn't know were minutes toward this. There was a pattern if I looked closely. There was comfort where there should have been distance. I made a decision without drama. I folded the invitation back into its place and slid it into the drawer with the bills next to a stack of old receipts. It felt like keeping a small, dangerous thing in a safe place. I brewed another cup of coffee. The kettle clicked off, and the house filled with that steady, ordinary sound. I breathed in and tried to find a point of view that wasn't raw. My memory offered options: denial, anger, negotiation. I sat with none. I sat with the quiet of not knowing how to name a new kind of hurt. There are memories that lie to you, and memories that tell the truth in small, stubborn ways. I stood by the window and watched a delivery truck stop across the street. A man climbed down and handed a package to an elderly woman. He smiled like an apology for the weather. The rest of the world was gentle, as if it wanted nothing to do with my sudden private rearrangement. I thought of my mother and the way she would fold notes into her pocket when she didn't want anyone else to read them. I found myself saying aloud to the empty kitchen, "Some stories don't just tell pain, they reveal the truth. This is one of them. Voice of Aunt." Saying it felt like placing a name on the thing in front of me. It did not make me braver. It made me clearer. There was a sound at the door. The neighbour's child running, shoes slapping the pavement. The exact kind of small interruption that prevents catastrophe. I opened the drawer, touched the edge of the invitation as if it might give instructions, then closed it again. My hands shook slightly, enough for the cup to tremble, not spill. I didn't call Evan that night. I didn't drive to their house. The better part of me listened for a reason to wait, as if time could collect facts for me. The worse part of me wanted a confession shaped like a promise. I washed the cup, dried it, and set it down. The steam had long gone. The house went on with its ordinary noises. I sat in the silence and let the names on the card sit with me, like a new word I had to learn to pronounce. I didn't sleep that night. The kind of half-wake where your eyes stay closed, but the mind keeps pacing the same 3 steps. By morning, the light looked older than it should have, greyish, hesitant. The invitation was still in the drawer, but it felt like it had a heartbeat of its own. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and told myself it was just a mistake, a name mix-up. Maybe another Grace, another Evan, another life. But the truth has this way of scratching under the door. I remembered the first time Evan brought flowers for both of us. One bouquet for me, one for Grace, because she'd helped him pick the ring. "She's got an eye for things," he'd said. I'd thought it was sweet. She'd blushed and tucked her hair behind her ear, laughing the way people do when they want to hide something tender. It felt harmless then, like family. I can still see the light on that afternoon, the kitchen window catching dust in the air. He was leaning against the counter, watching her talk about lilies, about how they last longer in cold water. His smile had been small, private. I noticed it, but filed it away under tiredness, familiarity, anything but what it was. When you start remembering differently, every sound changes pitch. A week after the invitation, I found an old photo wedged inside a drawer I was cleaning, the summer barbecue at Dad's lake house. We were all there, smoke in the air, laughter without echo. Evan had his arm around me, but his eyes were somewhere else. Grace was holding a plate of corn, half smiling toward him. I hadn't seen it then. I was busy being happy. That picture sat on the counter all day, like evidence I hadn't asked for. I kept glancing at it between chores, between breaths. Sometimes truth arrives in soft images, not confrontations. That evening I called Mom. Her voice was weaker than I remembered, years of heart medicine softening the edges. I told her about the invitation, trying to sound calm. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, "some loves start in the wrong room." It sounded like forgiveness and warning at once. I wanted to ask if she'd known, if she'd ever noticed the way they lingered when they said goodbye. But she coughed, tired, and I let the silence close the call. After that, I stopped trying to explain it to anyone. I started watching the small things instead, the way people avoided my eyes when they mentioned Grace, the way mutual friends changed the subject. Secrets build neighborhoods around themselves. Everyone learns to drive the long way around. One afternoon, I drove past Grace's apartment. I told myself I was running errands. Her car wasn't there, but the window was open. A curtain fluttered, pale blue, the same color as the dress she wore at my engagement party. I laughed quietly in the car, one of those strange laughs that doesn't belong to joy, the kind that comes when pain surprises you by being so ordinary. I thought about the way Evan used to hum when he was nervous. A small tune, no lyrics, just breath and sound. The night he proposed, he hummed it while opening the box. And the last time I saw him, months ago, at a family dinner, he hummed it again when Grace walked into the room. Memory is cruel like that. It loops the melody even when you want silence. I found myself talking to the photograph that evening. Was it me? I asked the smiling version of myself. Or did you two always know? The woman in the photo didn't answer. She just kept smiling, as if she hadn't learned yet. The house felt heavier with every quiet second. I turned off the lights, sat by the window. Outside, the street lamp flickered once, then steadied, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to see. My reflection in the glass looked foreign. Tired eyes, mouth too tight. I didn't recognize that woman anymore. The next day, my neighbor Martha dropped by with cookies. "Saw your sister at the market yesterday," she said, casual. Pretty girl, she looked happy. Her words landed softly, but the air after them didn't. I smiled the way people do when they need the conversation to end. She stayed a little longer, talking about weather and new curtains, not noticing that my hands never moved from my lap. When she left, I went to the kitchen sink, turned on the tap, and watched the water fill a glass until it overflowed. It reminded me of the night Evan and I first met. He'd done the same thing, distracted by my voice, spilling water across the counter. We'd laughed then. Now it felt like foreshadowing I'd missed. I tried writing a letter. Not to send, just to see what my words looked like on paper. "Dear Grace," I began, then stopped. The next line refused to come. The page stayed white, the pen heavy. Sometimes anger has no alphabet. So I put the pen down and stared at the paper until the edges curled a little from the lamp's heat. The smell of ink stayed in the air, sharp and clean, like something new that shouldn't be. Later, I walked outside barefoot, felt the grass damp from the sprinklers. The sky had that late summer glow, orange bleeding into violet. For a moment, it almost calmed me. The realization that the world kept moving, stubbornly beautiful even when everything else broke shape. I thought about Grace again, about how she always said love was about timing. Maybe she was right. Maybe she just borrowed mine. I went back inside and placed the photograph next to the invitation in the drawer. The two of them together made sense now, the way puzzle pieces hurt when they finally fit. I didn't cry. Not yet. My heart felt like a closed room, full of air, but no sound. The evening settled into quiet, the kind that isn't peace, but a pause before it. I leaned back against the chair, eyes half closed, listening to the house breathe around me. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The wind shifted, carrying a faint smell of rain. I whispered into the stillness, more to myself than anyone. I guess comfort can hide a storm. For 3 days, I didn't touch the drawer. I kept walking past it like it was a room someone had died in. Quiet, respectful, pretending not to look inside. Every time I made coffee, the thought brushed by, faint but certain. You should call them. But what does one even say? Congratulations, or how could you? On the 4th day, I did neither. I just sent a text to Grace. "Can we talk?" The dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. By evening, the silence had learned to sit next to me like an old friend. I called Evan too. His number still saved with a heart, the kind you forget to delete. It rang once, twice, then stopped. No voicemail, no sound, just that blank space where words should live. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed, catching my reflection. A face trying not to beg. The next morning, I found myself driving without purpose, The kind of drive that begins with, "I need milk," and ends with, "How did I get here?" I parked across from the cafe we used to love, the windows fogged from inside, soft jazz playing through the glass. The bell above the door still chimed the same way it used to when he'd hold it open for me. I almost laughed at the thought. How everything small keeps working even when the big things collapse. Inside, the air smelled like baked sugar and burnt espresso. And there he was, sitting alone near the back, phone on the table, fingers tracing the rim of a cup. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd seen me too soon. Maybe we could still pretend we were strangers. But his eyes lifted, and the pretending ended. He didn't smile. Neither did I. I walked over, my hand on the chair before I'd even decided to sit. He looked older, tired, not guilty, just emptied. I said softly, "You still drink the same coffee?" He nodded, staring into the cup. There was a pause that felt like the end of a chapter no one finished reading. He spoke first. "Laura, you look well." It wasn't a compliment. It was a distraction. I waited for the next line, the apology, the explanation, something human. None came, only a small exhale, and then, "I didn't plan for this." The words landed between us like a paper boat that already knows it will sink. I wanted to ask when, why, how long. But instead, I heard myself saying, "You could have just told me." He looked up, eyes soft but distant. "You deserve someone honest." That line. It sounded prepared, polished, something he'd repeated in his head until it lost meaning. I almost smiled. "Honest people don't wait to be caught," I said quietly. His jaw tensed, the kind of tension that hides regret under pride. The waiter came by, asking if I wanted anything. I shook my head. Evan whispered a thank you too low to hear. The moment passed like a breeze that couldn't decide which way to go. We sat in silence, both pretending to check our phones. Somewhere outside, a bus hissed to a stop. Someone laughed. And right there, amid the noise of ordinary life, something in me just released. Not forgiveness, not anger, just the weight of trying to make sense of nonsense. When I finally stood to leave, I said, "I hope she loves you enough to forget how you found her." He flinched, not visibly, but enough for me to see the truth fold behind his eyes. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Outside, the air was colder than it should have been for May. The sky felt low, like it was listening. I crossed the street slowly, the kind of slow where every step sounds like a decision. Back home, I placed my purse on the counter, poured water into the kettle, and listened to the wind chime outside the window. It rang steady, soft, rhythmic, cruelly calm. The same wind chime he'd given me our first Christmas together. I'd always loved that sound. Now it felt like mockery wearing a gentle disguise. I sat down, phone still in hand, and opened the drawer. The invitation stared back, still neat, still smug. I placed the photo beside it again. The barbecue, their smiles, my blindness. It felt like arranging evidence at a trial where no one shows up. That night, I didn't dream of him. I dreamed of silence, long roads with no names, faceless crowds moving away. It wasn't peace. It was just the absence of noise. And when I woke, I realized the silence hadn't left. It was sitting right there in my chest, patient as grief. I went to the window, pressed my fingers against the glass, and whispered to the morning, "Funny how lies can sound gentle when spoken softly." 3 days passed before Grace showed up at my door. No text, no warning, just the soft knock that used to mean I brought pie. This time, it didn't. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a pale dress, the kind you wear when you're trying to look put together. Her hair was curled, her smile careful. Her hands kept brushing invisible dust from her sleeves. Guilt has small ticks. "Hey," she said. The word landed oddly, like it didn't know where to sit. I stepped aside, and she walked in without waiting for an invitation, as if she still believed she had one. The house smelled of tea. I'd just boiled water, so I asked if she wanted some. She nodded, maybe grateful for the distraction. The kettle whistled louder than usual, cutting through the silence that followed us into the kitchen. She sat at the table, tracing circles on the wood grain with her finger. I poured the tea, careful not to spill, and placed the cups down. One of them trembled slightly. I realized it was mine. "So," she started, but stopped midway. The spoon in my hand clinked against the cup once, clear, deliberate. The sound filled the room like punctuation. "It just happened," she said finally, eyes fixed on the steam. "I didn't mean for it to, but it did." There it was, the line that people use when they want to soften betrayal, like accident and choice are neighbors. I didn't say anything. The tea cooled between us, untouched. She kept talking, faster now, words tumbling out like loose beads. "We didn't plan it, Laura. You were gone that weekend and he came over to fix the garden lights. We talked. We—" She stopped. "I don't even know when it turned into this." Her voice cracked on this. That single word stretched between us, thin as glass. I watched her hands twist in her lap. They used to be small and sure, the same hands that braided my hair when we were children. Now they looked like they were holding guilt by the corners, afraid it might spill. I wanted to yell, to throw the cup, to make the hurt visible. But my body didn't move that way anymore. Instead, I found myself speaking softly, the way you speak to a frightened animal. "It's not what you think," she whispered again. "No," I said. "It's exactly what I think." Her face fell. There was a long pause. The clock ticked, slow, too slow. Then she said something I didn't expect. "Evan wants to talk to you." I looked up. "About what?" She swallowed hard. He wants your blessing before the wedding." The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Blessing. The word felt heavy and hollow at once. She said it like it was a kindness, like giving my consent could turn wrong into right. I leaned back in the chair, watching her. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling between apology and fear. Somewhere deep down, she still believed we were sisters who could survive anything. She didn't realize that some betrayals don't tear you apart. They just quietly move you to a different world. I asked, "Does he know you're here?" She nodded. "Did he send you?" Her silence answered. I smiled faintly. "Tell him he can come himself if he wants it." Her eyes widened, relief flickering. She thought I meant it kindly. We sat for a while longer. Neither of us touched the tea. The steam was gone, leaving only the faint scent of chamomile, something once meant to soothe. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. I almost said, "You didn't want to," but you did anyway. Instead, I just nodded. Because what's the point of teaching regret its own language? The door clicked shut behind her. The silence that followed was thicker than before, like the air had absorbed everything she couldn't say. I stood there for a moment, looking at the 2 cups on the table, the faint tea marks forming small halos. Then I carried them to the sink and let the water run over them until the warmth left completely. "Would you forgive them if this happened to you?" I dried my hands and looked toward the drawer, the one holding that envelope and that photograph. It was still closed, but I could feel its weight from across the room. Some objects don't need to be seen to remind you they exist. Outside, rain had started. Slow, steady drops on the porch railing. I opened the window and let the smell of wet air drift in. It felt like an answer that didn't fix anything, just made breathing possible again. That night, I lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. Each drop sounded like a word I'd never get to say out loud. And when the clock struck 2, I realized something. I didn't need to confront them anymore. They'd already told me everything, without even meaning to. A week later, I heard his knock. Low, hesitant, like a man unsure if the door still knew his name. When I opened it, Evan was standing there in the same jacket he used to wear on our late drives, a soft brown one with worn sleeves. It made him look smaller than I remembered. Or maybe time had shrunk something else, the space between what we were and what we became. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice carried that polite guilt people wear when they think manners can dress up betrayal. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around as if everything might still recognize him. The couch, the framed photo of us at the fair, the small plant by the window he once said looked like it's always reaching for something. The silence was thick. He rubbed his palms together. "You still keep the place warm," he murmured. I didn't answer. He looked at the table where the invitation used to sit. "Grace said she came by." I nodded once. "She told me you were calm about it." "I had time to practice," I said softly. He winced. His eyes found the floor. "I didn't come to explain," he began. "You deserve better than excuses." I waited. People always say that right before they start explaining. He sighed. "I just needed to ask something." I could already feel it coming, like a cold front before rain. He met my eyes for the first time. "I want your blessing before we get married." The words didn't sting. They echoed, hollow, predictable, a phrase rehearsed too many times in front of a mirror. For a moment, I thought he was joking, but his face held that strange earnestness of someone desperate to be forgiven by history. "Why?" I asked. He blinked. "Because it matters to me. Because you mattered to me. And I can't walk into that day without cleaning your conscience," I finished for him. He fell quiet. His jaw tightened, that same old habit he had when he was cornered. He looked at the window instead. "You were always stronger than me." I almost laughed. That's convenient to say now. He shook his head. "It's true. You'd have handled this better. You always handled everything better." I watched him for a long time. He looked like a man rehearsing regret instead of living it. I could see it in the way he kept folding his hands, the way his eyes darted toward the photo shelf and then away. He wasn't asking for my blessing. He was asking for an escape route, a way to carry less guilt to the altar. I said, "You already have it." He blinked. I do?" I nodded slowly. "You have it." He smiled, a small, awkward, relieved smile, mistaking mercy for approval. But inside me, something else spoke. "You have it because I'm done carrying you." He stepped closer, as if to thank me. I took a step back, just enough for space to mean something. "Grace will be happy to hear that," he said softly. I looked him in the eye. "Make sure she stays happy, Evan, because the kind of peace you break doesn't come back twice." He didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes wet, but not crying. The kind of tears men keep for themselves so they can still say they were strong. When he left, the door clicked shut in that quiet, final way doors do when a chapter ends without ceremony. The sound lingered. I stood there for a minute, watching the outline of his shadow fade across the porch. Inside, the house hummed. The refrigerator buzzed faintly, the only sound left in the room. It reminded me that life keeps making small noises even after big silences. I walked to the sink, filled a glass of water, and stared out the window. The sky was turning grey, half evening, half memory. Somewhere a lawnmower droned, children laughed. Ordinary sounds, clean and unbroken. I placed the glass down and whispered to the empty air, "Sometimes silence is the loudest blessing." And maybe that's all it ever was. Not forgiveness, not peace. Just a silence shaped like goodbye. The rest of the night, I didn't think of him as the man I lost. I thought of him as the man who mistook my stillness for kindness. And for the first time in months, that thought didn't hurt. It simply existed, like a closed book on a shelf that no longer asks to be opened. The morning of their wedding arrived the way any ordinary day does, without asking permission. Sunlight poured through the blinds in uneven stripes, cutting across the floor like quiet reminders. The invitation still lay in the drawer, unopened since the day I placed it there. I pulled it out now, not to read, just to feel its weight. The edges were soft from my fingers, the gold lettering faint where the light caught it. Evan and Grace. The ampersand looked almost tender, as if it refused to believe what it was joining together. I didn't dress up, didn't reach for my keys, didn't even check the time. I made tea instead, just 1 cup, and sat beside the window watching the clouds shift like slow thoughts. Somewhere, someone was stringing flowers, pinning corsages, straightening chairs. Somewhere, my sister was putting on a white dress. At 9, I wrapped the invitation in a small linen napkin, tied it with thread, and placed it in my bag. Then I drove to the cemetery. The road was empty, the world unbothered. The radio hummed a love song I didn't have the strength to turn off. The grass at my mother's grave was freshly trimmed. I knelt down, brushed a few leaves away, and placed the small bundle near her name. "You'd know what to say better than I do," I whispered. The air around me was still. A sparrow landed on the headstone for a moment, tilting its head like it understood. Then it flew off, quick and unburdened. I stayed there longer than I needed to, not crying, not talking, just breathing in the quiet the world keeps for those who have stopped asking questions. By afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, though I didn't need to guess who sent it. A photo, Grace in her gown, bouquet in hand, smile trembling like it wanted permission. Evan beside her, looking the same as he always did, half absent, half sure. There was no caption, just the image. I stared at it until it blurred, then set the phone face down on the table. The house felt strangely full, as if every wall had something to say but chose not to. I made another cup of tea and left it untouched. The candle beside the window flickered once, then steadied. Evening arrived like an afterthought. The sky outside turned the color of bruise. I was half reading a book when the phone rang again. Evan's name. For a moment, my thumb hovered over decline. Then I pressed answer. His voice came through, thin, uneven. "Laura, are you home?" "I am." He hesitated. "She's crying." "Grace?" "Yes." "She's been crying since dinner. She says she can't stop." The sound of his breath filled the silence between words. I could picture him standing somewhere quiet, tie loosened, panic sitting heavy on his chest. "I don't know what to do," he said. "She keeps saying she feels guilty, that she sees your face every time she closes her eyes." For a long moment, I didn't speak. My reflection in the window looked calm. Too calm. Then I said softly, "Because blessings aren't words, Evan. They're weight." He went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of static on the line. Then, almost in a whisper, "Did I make a mistake?" I closed my eyes. "You made a choice." He didn't answer. A faint shuffle. Then the line went dead. The room was quiet again. Outside, the streetlights blinked awake one by one. I leaned back, watching the candle flame dance against the glass. It bent and straightened, as if breathing with me. For the first time in months, I felt no ache. Just a soft, ache-shaped peace. The kind that doesn't need fixing. I walked to the drawer, took out the photo from that barbecue long ago, and slid it behind the others. The moment didn't deserve to stay in front anymore. The night air slipped through the window, cool and kind. Somewhere far away, music must have played. A toast raised, a bouquet tossed, laughter that would fade by morning. I sat by the candlelight and whispered to myself, peace doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer waiting for an apology. Then I blew out the candle, and the room turned gently dark. Months passed quietly, like pages turning in a book I'd already read. The mornings softened again. I started waking without dread, the kind of waking that doesn't need remembering what hurts. Grace messaged once in January. We're moving away. Evan got a job up north. No apology, no explanation, just those words, polite and finished. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then locked my phone. There are goodbyes that don't need to be said aloud. They come written between the lines. After that, life returned like a slow tide. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, repainted the walls a shade lighter, and donated the jacket Evan once left behind. The air smelled different now, cleaner somehow. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming while washing dishes and stop halfway, surprised at the sound of my own piece. The photo wall stayed mostly the same, except for one frame now empty. People notice it when they visit. They ask, what used to be there? I smile and say, something I no longer needed proof of. It's strange how love leaves in layers. First the person, then their voice in your head, then, eventually, the idea that they ever belonged there. Grace sent another message a few weeks later. A picture of snow outside their new house, captioned, First Winter Together. I looked at it for a long time, not out of pain, out of curiosity. She looked happy, or trying to, and I felt nothing sharp. Just a quiet distance, like seeing a familiar town through the window of a train you'll never step off to visit again. Some evenings, I walk to the lake, the same one from that old photograph. The water mirrors the sky, both endless, both unbothered. I sit there with a thermos of tea, watching the light move across the surface. There's a peace that comes when you stop demanding closure. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It seeps in slowly, unnoticed, until one day you realize you're breathing easier. Sometimes I think of Evan's voice on the phone that night, the tremor when he said she's crying. I wonder if he ever understood that guilt is just the echo of what conscience refuses to bury. And Grace, my sister, if she still keeps that small twist in her hands when she's nervous. I hope it's gone. I really do. Because if pain must exist, let it at least teach softness. Last week, I passed by the cafe we once loved. It's been renovated. New chairs, new owner, new everything. The wind chime still hangs above the door, though. It rang when someone walked in, that same tender sound. For a second, I stood outside and smiled. The sound didn't hurt anymore. It was just sound. People say forgiveness is about letting go. I think it's more about not letting the wrong parts stay. I came home that evening to my small, warm house and lit a candle by the window. The flame flickered the way it always does, steady at first, then bending slightly, as if bowing to the air. I sat by it, not thinking, not remembering, just being. And as the room filled with that familiar soft light, I thought, this is what survival sounds like when it stops whispering. I stayed silent, but the truth found its voice. Stories like this never fade. Voice of Aunt.